As the anticipation for Squid Game Season 3 continues to build, fans around the world are formulating intricate theories about where the story will head next. With the first 2 seasons having delivered shocking twists, social commentary, and morally complex characters, it's only natural that viewers are now diving deep into the possibilities for the future of the franchise. Season 2 left many unanswered questions and opened doors to entirely new directions. In this installment, we will begin our exploration of some of the most compelling and plausible theories surrounding Squid Game Season 3. One of the most talked about theories revolves around Song Ji-hun, the protagonist of the series. After emerging as the sole survivor in Season 1, Ji-hun underwent a drastic transformation. Season 2 reveals that he is not ready to let go of the horrors he experienced. Instead of moving on with his winnings, he chooses to remain in South Korea and investigate the organization behind the deadly games. The cliffhanger ending, where Ji-hun turns back at the airport instead of boarding a flight to see his daughter, suggests a new mission. Many fans believe that Season 3 will fully embrace Ji-hun's role as an anti-hero, possibly even a mole or double agent aiming to dismantle the Squid Game organization from the inside. If Ji-hun is indeed attempting to infiltrate the organization, the question becomes how he might succeed. One theory suggests that he will volunteer to participate in the games once more, but this time with a hidden agenda. Armed with the knowledge of how the system works, he could act as a saboteur, helping fellow contestants escape or leak crucial information to the authorities. This could add an espionage thriller element to the otherwise brutal survival narrative, showing us the games not only from the contestants' perspective but also from the operational side. Another possibility is that Ji-hun will try to make contact with other past winners. It's unclear how many victors there have been throughout the years, but Season 1 implies that there are multiple survivors who have gone on to live lives of luxury and silence. If Ji-hun can rally a group of former winners who also feel guilt or resentment toward the organization, they might band together to expose the truth. This would create an underground resistance movement and offer a new storyline that juxtaposes the quiet opulence of the winners' world with the raw terror of the games themselves. This also brings up the idea that Season 3 might delve deeper into the lore of the games. We know that the games have been happening for decades, but we don't know much about how they started. Were they always this brutal? Who founded them? There's speculation that we will finally get a full origin story, possibly told through flashbacks or journal entries left behind by the frontman or even the original founders. This could give the show a broader historical context and reveal that the games are part of a much older, perhaps global, conspiracy. Speaking of the frontman, his character arc remains one of the most mysterious. In Season 2, we learned that he is Hwang Jun-ho's brother, In-ho, and that he won the games before assuming his new role. Many theories suggest that he is not as loyal to the organization as he appears. Some even believe he is biding his time, possibly harboring regrets about what he's become. In this scenario, Ji-hun's investigation and potential infiltration might actually gain a powerful ally from within. The frontman might be the key to toppling the entire operation from the inside, especially if he is driven by unresolved feelings about his brother's fate. That leads us to Hwang Jun-ho, the detective from Season 1 who infiltrated the island in search of his missing brother. Though he was presumed dead after being shot and falling off a cliff, his death was never conclusively shown. This leaves the door wide open for his return. A popular theory suggests that Jun-ho survived and has been operating in the shadows, gathering evidence and planning his next move. If this is true, he and Ji-hun could potentially join forces in Season 3, bringing together their resources and knowledge to wage a full-scale attack on the system. Such an alliance would add depth to both characters and significantly raise the stakes of the story. On a more speculative note, some fans believe that Season 3 could introduce a brand new main character from another part of the world. This character could be someone who has been affected by the games in a different way, perhaps a family member of a victim, or even someone who was offered a place in the games and refused. This would allow the show to explore how the games impact people outside of the immediate circle of players. It could also be a way to show how far-reaching and interconnected the Squid Game organization really is, possibly revealing a network of games happening in different countries with slightly different rules and themes. Building on that idea, there's a theory that the creators of the games are not isolated to South Korea. The VIPs shown in Season 1 were clearly international, and their conversations suggested that other regions have their own versions of the games. If this is explored further, Season 3 could open up the universe to multiple locations and possibly even pit winners from different countries against each other in a sort of Champion of Champions event. This would dramatically expand the scope of the show and offer a commentary on globalization, capitalism, and the universal human condition. Then there's the theory involving OIL Nam, player 001, who was revealed in Season 1 to be one of the masterminds behind the games. Though he died at the end of Season 1, his presence looms large. Some fans think that he might not be the true originator, but rather a figurehead or one part of a larger board of directors. If this is the case, Ji-hun's quest for justice might reveal an even more sinister hierarchy that includes politicians, CEOs, and other powerful individuals. Season 3 could explore this shadowy council and their motivations, perhaps even introducing ideological clashes within the leadership itself. There's also speculation about the psychological evolution of the players. In previous seasons, we saw how the games break people down, but also how some players adapt, manipulate, or even embrace the carnage. Season 3 could introduce contestants who have studied the games and prepared for them, not just physically but psychologically. This could include cult-like fanatics who view the games as a form of divine justice or retribution, adding a religious or philosophical layer to the story. Imagine a player who believes the games are sacred and begins to preach to others, influencing the course of the game not just through violence but through ideology. Following the massive success of Squid Game's first 2 seasons, viewers are bracing for what could be an even more mind-bending and emotionally charged third installment. The complexity of the show leaves much room for speculation and interpretation, which is part of what has kept the fan base so engaged as we continue to explore the most compelling Squid Game Season 3 theories. One theme that keeps surfacing is how deeply psychological and socio-political the next season might become, unlike the first season, which was centered on survival, and the second season, which hinted at revenge and rebellion. The third season could very well dive into ideological warfare, with characters confronting not only each other but also their belief systems and values. A prevalent theory making the rounds involves the moral arc of Song Ji-hun evolving into something darker. In the first season, he was an everyman caught in extraordinary circumstances. In the second season, he began transforming into someone who wanted to fight back, but in the third season some fans believe he could go much further and potentially lose his moral compass altogether. Driven by obsession and haunted by trauma, Ji-hun may begin to blur the lines between justice and vengeance. Instead of trying to dismantle the games, he might find himself tempted to manipulate them for his own ends. This could mirror the path of the frontman, showing how even those with good intentions can be corrupted by power and proximity to evil. This possibility becomes even more plausible when considering that Ji-hun now knows what it feels like to be both a participant and a winner. He has seen the inner workings of the game and has experienced both powerlessness and power. The psychological toll of this duality could play a massive role in Season 3. Some theorists argue that Ji-hun could end up becoming a kind of new front man himself, especially if he is forced into making impossible choices to achieve his goals. The story might then focus on his inner battle as he navigates the blurry lines between revolution and tyranny. Alongside Ji-hun's descent or transformation, another theory gaining traction suggests a narrative split where we follow multiple protagonists across different locations. Season 1 largely confined itself to the game environment, and Season 2 opened the world up just a bit more, but Season 3 might fully embrace a global scope. For instance, we could be following Ji-hun's infiltration in Korea, while simultaneously introducing a new protagonist dealing with a similar Squid Game variant elsewhere. This dual storytelling could add richness and complexity while also providing fresh perspectives and thematic parallels. Some believe this global aspect will delve into how different cultures structure their own versions of the games. Imagine a version of Squid Game set in Europe, the Middle East, or South America, where the childhood games differ and the socio-economic commentaries are tailored to local issues. This approach would not only deepen the show's universality, but also demonstrate the reach and adaptability of the organization behind the games. Such an expansion could serve to show viewers that the games are not simply a South Korean problem but a global one, which reflects the international nature of class inequality and economic despair. Another angle being heavily theorized is the idea that the Squid Game organization might experience internal conflict. Not all who operate the games are fully convinced of their moral justification. Some might believe they're providing a necessary service, giving people a second chance, or offering a form of justice, but others may see it for what it is: pure exploitation. This ideological divide could lead to a power struggle within the organization itself, creating a subplot of betrayal, espionage, and revolution from within. Perhaps some of the masked workers, or even one of the VIPs, starts questioning the system they helped build. This inner strife could be accelerated by the events of Season 2, which might have shaken the confidence of those in charge. Gi-hun's resistance, the police investigation, and the possible survival of Junho could all act as catalysts for a splinter movement within the organization. This could set up an epic confrontation in Season 3, where the game runners themselves are at odds, leading to chaos both behind the scenes and within the games. It would mark a significant evolution of the narrative from external survival to internal collapse and reinvention. There is also a compelling theory that Season 3 will focus on the concept of legacy. What happens when the games start to be seen not only as entertainment or opportunity, but as a kind of myth or legend passed down through generations. In this scenario, we might meet characters who grew up hearing whispers of the Squid Game, perhaps children of past winners or staff. These characters might join the game not out of desperation but out of a desire to understand a part of their own history, or to honor or challenge a family legacy. This would allow the story to explore how trauma and violence can be inherited, and how systems of oppression are often perpetuated by those who were once victims. On a more symbolic level, this legacy theory could also be visualized through a new generation of players who are much younger than in past seasons. Maybe there is a version of the games that recruits teenagers or even children. This would be a chilling yet poignant commentary on how the system preys on youth, and how society often fails to protect its most vulnerable members. Of course, such a move would be highly controversial, but it fits the show's history of using extreme scenarios to spotlight real-world issues. Then there's the idea that Season 3 could feature an open rebellion within the game itself. Picture a season where a group of contestants realize the futility of competing against each other, and instead band together to subvert the rules. They might fake eliminations, create false alliances, or even attempt a coup against the game masters. This would be a dramatic break from past seasons and inject a fresh sense of urgency and unpredictability into the narrative. It would also be thematically rich, illustrating how solidarity and collective action can be a powerful force even in the most dehumanizing situations. Some fans even speculate that the rebellion could be led by someone who was planted in the game with the express purpose of stirring dissent. Maybe Gi-hun or another infiltrator disguises themselves as a contestant to foment chaos from within. This tactic would mirror historical rebellions where insiders disguised as outsiders work to dismantle authoritarian systems from within by using the game's structure against itself. This strategy would be both clever and symbolically powerful, highlighting the idea that even the most oppressive systems contain the seeds of their own undoing. Another theory worth considering involves artificial intelligence and surveillance. We already know the games are heavily monitored, with every move tracked by cameras and staff. But what if Season 3 introduces an AI element, perhaps a system that controls the games entirely without human intervention? This would raise frightening questions about accountability, automation, and the dehumanization of morality. If a machine decides who lives or dies, does that make it more just or more horrifying? The show could delve into the philosophical implications of technology being used to enforce a social hierarchy, and the terrifying potential of removing human empathy from deadly decision-making. As we continue to peel back the layers of what Squid Game Season 3 could deliver, the web of fan theories grows more intricate and philosophical. The brilliance of the series lies in its dual capacity to thrill and disturb, to dazzle with visual horror while also delivering sharp social commentary. This balance makes it fertile ground for speculation, and among the fanbase, countless theories now explore not just what will happen, but what the show could represent in its next phase. In this installment, we explore deeper theories about identity, control, and the boundaries between games and reality. One of the more haunting theories gaining attention is the concept of identity erasure. In Seasons 1 and 2, we already see how participants are stripped of their names and assigned numbers. Workers wear masks and uniforms that make them indistinguishable. But what if Season 3 introduces a more aggressive erasure of identity, where contestants no longer even remember who they are? Imagine a version of the game that involves a drug-induced memory loss, perhaps to prevent rebellion or to force contestants to operate on instinct alone. This would take the theme of dehumanization to new levels, and viewers would be forced to consider what makes someone who they are if their memories are taken away. This type of storyline could also set up some truly mind-bending twists. For instance, what if Ji-hun infiltrates the game again but loses his memory in the process? He might unknowingly become one of the contestants he aimed to save, leading to a powerful emotional arc where he rediscovers his mission piece by piece. It would be a risky narrative move, but one that could pay off in psychological depth and dramatic irony. Fans love the emotional complexity Ji-hun brings to the show, and this plotline would intensify it dramatically, forcing him to fight not just against the system but for his own identity. In a related theory, some fans speculate that Season 3 might explore the idea of programmed loyalty. Not all workers in the games are there by choice, and it's possible that some have been conditioned or brainwashed to serve the system. This could explain the robotic obedience and the absence of empathy among many of the masked staff. A third season could dive deeper into the training and indoctrination of these workers, possibly even focusing on a character who begins to question their role. Imagine a worker who starts off loyal and detached, but through encounters with certain players or exposure to memories, begins to unravel. This would humanize the faceless enforcers of the game and add complexity to what has so far been a monolithic enemy force. That theory ties in well with a potential plotline involving internal sabotage. If some of the workers start to question their programming or mission, it opens the door for a mutiny. Perhaps a faction of disillusioned staff starts covertly aiding players, or even plotting to bring down the system from within. The tension of secret alliances and the fear of discovery would add a new layer of suspense to the already intense environment. It would also drive home the theme that no system, no matter how rigid or controlling, can completely erase free will and moral agency. A separate but equally intriguing theory suggests that the entire premise of Squid Game might shift in Season 3 to blur the line between game and reality. What if contestants are no longer aware that they are in a game? Or what if the game continues outside the arena, bleeding into their daily lives in ways they cannot control or escape? This would be a commentary on surveillance culture and the inescapability of modern systems of control. Players could be monitored not just during the games, but indefinitely, their behavior analyzed and manipulated for ongoing entertainment or data collection. In such a world, there is no real outside, only varying levels of the game. This theory also dovetails with fan speculation about a more dystopian evolution of the Squid Game universe. In this scenario, the games are no longer a secret, underground affair but an accepted part of society. They might be legalized or even televised, with the public complicit in the spectacle. Viewers could vote on outcomes, sponsor players, or bet on eliminations. This would echo the themes of media desensitization and collective moral decay, drawing parallels to real-world reality TV and its worst excesses. Season 3 might show a society where the boundaries between entertainment, punishment, and social mobility have collapsed entirely. Then there's the theory of generational exploitation. The previous seasons focused primarily on adults caught in economic despair, but what if Season 3 features multi-generational teams, parents and children, or siblings forced to participate together? This would amplify the emotional stakes and explore how cycles of poverty and desperation are often inherited. Such a storyline could showcase how the system pits even families against each other, reinforcing the show's grim commentary on capitalism and competition. The challenge for the characters wouldn't only be survival, but the preservation of their family bonds in the face of dehumanizing pressure. One fan theory proposes a dark twist on this idea, that contestants are given a moral dilemma at the start of the season. They can choose to play alone with a small reward or enter with a loved one for a much larger prize. This scenario would immediately set up moral tension, exploring how far people are willing to go and what sacrifices they're prepared to make for the promise of wealth. It would also create natural emotional pairings for the show to develop, resulting in either heartwarming alliances or heartbreaking betrayals. Another speculative thread involves the introduction of an insider documentary project. Imagine if one of the characters in Season 3 is secretly recording the games, hoping to leak the footage and expose the organization. This person could be a journalist, a whistleblower, or even an undercover agent. The inclusion of this perspective would offer a meta-narrative, reflecting how we as viewers consume the show while one of its own characters tries to reveal it to the world within the story. This plot device would also raise questions about ethics and voyeurism. If we're horrified by the games, why do we watch them? It could be a commentary on our real-world obsession with violent entertainment. Some fans theorize that the VIPs, whose presence in Season 1 sparked curiosity and revulsion, might take a more central role in Season 3. Instead of appearing as grotesque voyeurs, perhaps we see their private lives, their histories, or even how they were recruited into the organization. This could demystify the upper class and show that even they have motivations, weaknesses, and potentially fractures among themselves. A divided VIP council, each with different philosophies or goals, would make for a fascinating backdrop, turning the internal politics of the elite into a battleground that influences the design and execution of the games. As Squid Game's narrative potential continues to expand, the web of fan theories surrounding Season 3 shows no sign of slowing down. In fact, with each episode that has passed so far, more doors have opened to possibilities that challenge not only the show's characters but also our understanding of morality, society, and human behavior. With that in mind, Part 4 will focus on a set of theories that explore transformation, not just in individual characters but in the structure, philosophy, and global implications of the game itself. A central theory that has started to gain significant traction revolves around a total philosophical overhaul of the games. In Seasons 1 and 2, the games operated under the guise of fairness. Everyone had an equal chance, and rules were enforced equally, even if brutally. But Season 3 could take a darker turn by removing even that thin veneer of fairness. This theory posits that the game masters may intentionally design the new games to be unfair, to manipulate outcomes for entertainment, to favor certain contestants, or to emphasize chaos and unpredictability. The goal might shift from rewarding merit to exposing weakness, showing that the concept of fairness was always just an illusion. This would fit neatly into the show's commentary on how systems of power often claim to be fair but are rigged in reality. In this scenario, contestants may start to notice inconsistencies in the rules, or certain players might be given advantages. They may begin to suspect that outcomes are preordained. This could lead to intense paranoia, infighting, and emotional breakdowns, which would be exactly what the game masters want to observe. Such a season would reflect the modern workplace or political systems, where many people feel like they're part of a rigged game that pretends to be meritocratic while quietly rewarding the already privileged. Another compelling theory centers around Jun-ho, the police officer presumed dead after his confrontation with the frontman in Season 1. Fans have speculated endlessly about whether he survived his fall, and many believe that Season 3 might finally confirm that he is alive and plotting a more covert takedown of the game from within. This would be a welcome narrative twist, as Jun-ho had already demonstrated remarkable resourcefulness and moral clarity. But the twist in this theory is that Jun-ho doesn't return alone. According to this line of speculation, he spent the time since his disappearance building a coalition of ex-players, whistleblowers, and even defectors from the game staff who are willing to fight back. If Jun-ho does return as the leader of a resistance movement, it would open the door for a parallel storyline that runs alongside the games themselves. While contestants struggle for survival inside the game, forces on the outside could be working to expose or even sabotage the organization. This would create a dual narrative structure that keeps the audience engaged on two levels: the brutal drama inside the game and the tactical espionage on the outside. The contrast would also deepen the show's central message, that real power isn't always visible, and real change often requires work behind the scenes. There is also a fascinating theory about the front man's own internal conflict. While he has so far been portrayed as a cold, detached enforcer of the game's rules, Season 2 began to crack that exterior, showing signs that he may be haunted by what he has become. Fans speculate that Season 3 could reveal more of his past, perhaps delving into the choices that led him from winner to warden. Maybe he didn't accept the role willingly. Maybe he was manipulated, threatened, or coerced. If Season 3 explores this possibility, the front man could become one of the most complex characters in the show. Neither hero nor villain, but someone trapped by the same system he now upholds. In fact, there is a theory that suggests the front man might eventually become an ally to Ji-hun or Jun-ho, albeit a conflicted and reluctant one. He might see their resistance not as a threat, but as a chance for redemption. Perhaps he helps them in small, secretive ways, bending rules, feeding information, or sabotaging certain operations. This type of morally gray alliance would add a rich layer to the narrative, showing that even those who appear to be part of the problem might be looking for a way out. Then there's the theory that Season may 3rd introduce a new class of player: celebrities, influencers, or the ultra-rich who voluntarily enter the games either for thrill-seeking, penance, or social capital. This would flip the original concept on its head. Instead of desperate people being forced into the games out of financial ruin, these new contestants would enter by choice, believing they can win or that participation enhances their reputation. This could be a biting commentary on performative suffering and the way some people treat hardship as a badge of honor rather than a lived experience. It could also show how far removed the wealthy are from the consequences of the systems they uphold. In this scenario, the dynamic between contestants would be more volatile than ever. Resentment would brew among the financially desperate toward those who treat the game like a joke or a personal challenge. The power imbalance would be even more pronounced, and viewers could see how quickly privilege erodes empathy when survival is on the line. It would also raise questions about the value of human life, as contestants with everything might still risk it all, while others are fighting just to make it to the next day. A more technical theory that has gained popularity involves the architecture of the game environment itself. In previous seasons, the physical space of the game was already surreal, dreamlike, and intentionally disorienting. But Season 3 could push this even further by introducing a modular or shifting game environment. Fans imagine a setting that changes in real time, walls that move, floors that rearrange, rooms that rotate, making it impossible for players to map or strategize. This would increase tension and disorientation, making the game feel even more hostile and unpredictable. Such a dynamic environment would also symbolize the instability of modern life, especially for those in poverty. Just as people begin to understand the rules, those rules change. The rug is pulled out from under them again and again. It's a metaphor for economic volatility, political uncertainty, and systemic unpredictability. In this sense, the game would not just be a physical challenge but a psychological one, where the inability to plan becomes the true test. There's also a long-standing fan theory about the role of childhood trauma and its connection to the games. In Seasons 1 and 2, we saw how the childhood games served as both the physical structure of the contest and a symbolic layer for the contestants' emotional lives. Season 3 could take this further by showing that the games are specifically designed based on the players' individual pasts. Imagine a season where each round of the game is based on a different player's childhood memory, fear, or trauma. This would give the season a deeply personal and emotionally charged atmosphere. Every game would feel like a psychological assault, targeting the core of a person's identity. As the conversation surrounding Squid Game Season 3 continues to evolve, one thing becomes increasingly clear: the world of the show has grown far beyond the arena where players once ran across a giant playground. Now, fans are considering theories that touch not only on the structure of the game itself but also on geopolitics, technology, and philosophical questions about freedom and control. In this final section of the theory series, we'll explore the broadest, most imaginative, and perhaps the most chilling possibilities for the future of the Squid Game universe. A major theory that fans have proposed is the globalization of the games. In this scenario, Season 3 would reveal that the Korean branch of the game is only one part of a vast international network. This theory gained traction after the VIPs in Season 1 hinted that other countries have their own versions of the game. If true, this could mean that different regions conduct their own deadly tournaments, each with cultural variations of childhood games and societal commentary. Season 3 might explore how the games function in different political and economic environments, with regional variations designed to exploit the unique vulnerabilities of each culture. This theory opens up enormous narrative potential. For instance, players from different countries could be brought together in a kind of champions tournament, where past winners compete in an international round of the game. This version would raise the stakes not only on a personal level but also on a symbolic one, as each player represents the values and failures of their respective societies. The games could become a perverse form of diplomacy, a way for the elite to measure the strength of different populations while continuing to profit from suffering. Such a development would expand the series' scope and introduce new characters, languages, and ethical dilemmas. There is also a strong theory that technology will play a much larger role in Season 3. In previous seasons, surveillance was already a dominant theme, every movement monitored, every reaction recorded. But fans believe that the next season could introduce even more advanced forms of monitoring, including artificial intelligence and biometric tracking. Facial recognition could adjust the game difficulty in real time, or detect emotional responses and trigger events based on fear levels. Some speculate that players might be outfitted with neural implants or wearables that make it impossible to lie or hide their thoughts. This would add a science fiction edge to the series, but not in a way that feels unrealistic. In fact, it would mirror current concerns about data privacy, surveillance capitalism, and the way algorithms shape our daily lives. A game controlled by artificial intelligence, optimized for maximum psychological impact, would reflect a terrifying but believable evolution of the Squid Game concept. It would also raise new moral questions. Who's really responsible for the games if machines are making decisions? How do you rebel against a system that predicts your rebellion before you even act? A chilling extension of this theory suggests that the line between players and spectators might be intentionally blurred. What if Season 3 reveals that some players are unaware they are part of the game while others are planted as actors or undercover participants? This would create an atmosphere of extreme distrust, where alliances are impossible to maintain because no one knows who is genuine. It would also reflect real-world anxieties about manipulation and authenticity. How do we know when someone is truly on our side or just playing a role for someone else's benefit? In this kind of environment, the games become less about physical survival and more about mental endurance. Contestants would be constantly second-guessing not just the system but each other, turning the psychological intensity up to 11. This theme could be deepened by introducing memory manipulation, similar to what we explored in earlier parts of the series. If some players have had memories altered or suppressed, it raises deeper questions about truth and identity, and the audience is left trying to piece together the reality alongside the characters. Another theory pushes the story in a more existential direction, proposing that the Squid Game itself might evolve into a kind of ideology rather than just an event. In this version, the game spreads like a belief system, with people adopting its principles voluntarily. Underground clubs or cult-like groups might form, modeling themselves after the games, creating their own mini-tournaments with local rules. The show could explore how people internalize oppressive systems, sometimes even defending or replicating them despite the harm they cause. This would reflect how many real-world institutions persist not because of force but because people accept them as normal or necessary. In this storyline, the Squid Game might become self-sustaining. Even if the original organizers are removed, new leaders rise in their place, not because they are forced to, but because they believe in the system. This would be the most terrifying outcome of all, not just a game run by the elite for their amusement, but a philosophy adopted by the masses, turning victims into perpetrators. It would highlight the danger of normalization, of how once something horrifying becomes routine, it no longer feels wrong. There's also a philosophical theory that suggests Season May 3rd experiment with the idea of choice in a much more literal way. In previous seasons, players were technically free to leave but always returned due to their desperate circumstances. What if the next season removes the illusion of choice entirely? Contestants might be kidnapped, born into the game, or otherwise stripped of agency from the start. Alternatively, they could be given constant choices, but all of them terrible. Every option would carry consequences for someone else. Do you survive by sacrificing a stranger, or do you die for someone you love? This would turn each moment into a moral calculus, emphasizing how freedom often exists only within a constrained framework. This theory challenges viewers to consider how much real choice any of us have in our lives. Are we truly free, or are we just moving through a series of manipulated decisions designed to make us feel free? Squid Game has always operated in this psychological gray area, and Season 3 could dive even deeper, making the question of free will a central theme. A smaller but persistent theory centers around symbolism and allegory. Some fans believe that Season 3 might not just be a continuation of the story but a kind of retelling, perhaps through dreams, simulations, or storytelling within the world of Squid Game itself. There could be scenes that suggest the entire series is being reinterpreted by survivors, investigators, or even the media within the show's universe. This would add a layer of meta-commentary, suggesting that stories are shaped by those who tell them, and that truth is always filtered through perspective. In this version, Season 3 could feature unreliable narration, or shifts in visual and narrative style depending on whose viewpoint we are experiencing. Perhaps one episode follows a survivor's memories, while another shows a sanitized version made for public broadcast. This could reflect how history is rewritten by victors or manipulated by institutions. The show would then be commenting on itself, on media, and on how stories about trauma are consumed and commodified. As speculation continues to build around Season 3 of Squid Game, fans are increasingly drawn toward theories that challenge the audience's expectations of structure and morality. While previous parts explored technological enhancements, global expansion, psychological manipulation, and philosophical underpinnings, Part 6 will dive into how Season 3 might explore themes of legacy, generational trauma, and the evolution of power structures. In this installment, we turn our focus toward theories suggesting the game is no longer just a competition, but an institution, one that has begun to feed on itself and spawn successors. One of the most intriguing theories suggests that the original creators of the game, those who first envisioned and operationalized the concept, may no longer be in power. According to this idea, the VIPs, the frontman, and even the enigmatic hosts are now merely the most visible layer of a deeper, older system that has changed hands many times. In this vision, Season 3 could reveal that the origin of the game stretches back decades, possibly even generations. The theory goes that Squid Game started as a social experiment, perhaps during a time of national upheaval, designed to test psychological endurance under extreme poverty. Over time, it morphed from research into entertainment, and eventually into capitalism's most grotesque form of spectacle. This generational shift theory allows for the possibility that Season 3 will feature new figures rising to power, not by accident, but as a continuation of the system. Imagine that someone within the ranks of the workers or lower-level administrators has begun to emulate their superiors, climbing the hierarchy not to dismantle it, but to control it. This would be a subtle but brutal commentary on how systems of oppression often replicate themselves from within. Rather than ending the cycle, the oppressed sometimes aspire to become the oppressor. In this world, the front man might find himself being challenged not by external resistance but by internal successors. Perhaps there is a younger, more ruthless candidate being groomed to replace him, someone who sees his growing empathy or hesitation as a weakness. This would lead to a new kind of conflict, one that occurs not just between players but between those who enforce the rules. We could witness a shadow war within the organization, a secretive battle for control of the game's future direction. The front man, once a symbol of order, could become a relic in a more chaotic and ideologically twisted version of the game. Another related theory posits that Season may 3 delve deeply into the lives of the workers, the masked soldiers, managers, and enforcers who execute the game but live under strict rules themselves. Previous seasons offered brief glimpses of their internal struggles, hinting at a class system even among the staff. But what if Season 3 tears down that wall entirely and shows us that the workers are not just background figures, but central to the story? What if some of them have their own motivations for being there? Revenge, coercion, desperation, or even genuine belief in the system? A compelling angle would be to show that many of these workers were once players who lost, not in the game itself, but in life afterward. Maybe after surviving, they were offered the chance to join the staff in exchange for wiping away their debt or gaining access to forbidden knowledge. Season 3 could track one such worker's journey, gradually revealing how loyalty is manufactured not just through fear but through purpose. This approach would blur the lines between victim and perpetrator even further, asking the audience to reconsider who deserves sympathy and who doesn't. Some fans go even further, suggesting that Season 3 might show the rise of a new version of the game, a rogue faction creating an unauthorized variation that challenges the original. In this theory, someone like Ji-hun or Jun-ho, believing that simply exposing the existing game is not enough, creates an alternate version of Squid Game with different rules. This could be a counter-system designed not to exploit but to rehabilitate, intended to demonstrate how cooperative models can replace violent competition. But of course, human nature being what it is, even this version could spiral out of control. This scenario would create an ideological contrast between the original game and its imitators, showcasing how power corrupts even the best intentions. The rogue game might start with principles, voluntary entry, transparency, perhaps even non-lethal consequences, but under pressure, it begins to mimic the very thing it was meant to replace. Players might resist cooperating, fall into old patterns of betrayal, or push for more excitement. Slowly, the alternative game becomes a mirror of the first, raising haunting questions about whether it's the system that corrupts people or whether people bring corruption to any system they enter. Another theory delves into the idea of legacy not just in terms of power, but in terms of family. What if Season 3 introduces the children of former players, those who survived or died in the previous games? The trauma experienced in earlier seasons would then be passed down in a literal, generational way. The show could follow young adults who have grown up in the aftermath of the games, perhaps trying to piece together the truth about their parents' fate. Some may stumble upon clues, becoming amateur investigators. Others might be recruited into the game themselves, continuing a cycle they never chose. This kind of narrative would add emotional depth, especially if characters unknowingly end up competing against or allying with the descendants of people from previous seasons. It would also deepen the commentary on how poverty, trauma, and violence are inherited rather than isolated. Just as wealth tends to remain in families, so too do the scars of survival. Season 3 could then become a meditation on whether the next generation can break free of the cycle, or whether they are fated to repeat it. There's also a speculative theory that Season 3 might not take place in the traditional sense at all. What if everything we've seen so far has been leading to an artificial simulation of the Squid Game? This idea isn't about digital simulation like VR, but rather a controlled, performative version of the game intended for broadcast. In this theory, a high-level government or corporate sponsor, concerned about the instability caused by the original games, decides to replicate them as propaganda or psychological warfare. Participants are actors or unwilling test subjects, and the purpose is not money or entertainment but social control. In this scenario, Season 3 might reveal that the game's format has been co-opted as a way to distract or pacify certain segments of the population. A televised version of the game might serve to reinforce class divisions by normalizing struggle as entertainment. The idea of the game becomes a metaphor for life under surveillance and manufactured consent, and contestants are no longer chosen for desperation but for symbolism. The game becomes a message, one that viewers within the show are meant to internalize. You cannot win unless you play by their rules. This would be a radical departure from previous seasons but would fit with the show's history of evolving its scope. It could also serve as a critique of real-world media culture, where suffering is often commodified, and lines between news, entertainment, and propaganda are increasingly blurred.